Russ, you tell me when you are ready.
It's on.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. I know we mentioned it at last Monday's council meeting that we wanted to have this utilities type open forum to answer some questions about lead and copper, about some notices that have gone out, particularly about the phosphate that was doing corrosion control treatment, and hopefully we'll get into why we have to do that, which has been a few years coming. We need an update on what the installation progress is, and some other helpful information about what lead testing in water and such. So a lot of this, for people who've seen this presentation and people who watch it later, will be some repeated information that we've heard before, but it's good to go over it again and have some updated information as well. So I'm going to turn it over to our professionals, but I want to introduce all of us as well, and kind of go down the table so everyone knows who we are. So Councilman Peretti, I'm chair of the Utilities Department this year. Dave Potter, councilman, also a member of the Utilities Department. And I will pass it down for you guys. I'm not going to introduce anyone. You guys introduce yourselves.
I'll start. My name's Max Huber. I was at the meeting last week. I'm the licensed operator of record for the Borough of Milltown. I'm also the licensed operator of record for the Borough of Hawthorne, and I sit on the board of directors for the SMCMUA, Southeast Morris Municipal Utilities Authority.
And I'm Janelle Larison, the business administrator and the CFO for the Borough of Milltown.
My name is Bill Mitchell. I'm an engineer with CME Associates.
Luke Lascanka, also from CME Associates.
And Mike McClellan, CME Associates. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. And then I think I'm going to turn it over to Bill. You're going to...
So I'm going to do some
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
introductory
Yeah.
So Bill Mitchell is our regulatory compliance person at our office, and we have made a couple of these presentations in Milltown Borough before. We've been asked to come tonight and give you an update as to where we are with the lead and copper control and corrosion, and we're here to answer any questions. What we thought we'd do is go through the presentation first, and when we're done, take questions. If it's something you really have to get answered, by all means, just interrupt us. But for the most part, we're going to try and take questions and answers at the same time at the end. Okay? Without further ado, I'll ask Mr. Mitchell. We've got a PowerPoint. We're going to make a presentation and hopefully go through and answer most of your questions. Okay?
Don't make it too dark. I'm going to change it a little closer.
Okay, so we're going to talk about lead, copper, and corrosion control here in the Borough of Milltown. I don't know if everybody can see this, but 1986, the Safe Drinking Water Act came about. There was it also, much better. It had a lead-free solder was defined as 0.2%, but it's interesting to note that when they did this, lead-free piping and fittings were defined as having less than 8% lead. So that still means there was a significant amount of lead in the plumbing for fixtures and things of that sort in the houses and used in the homes and businesses. 1991 adopted the lead and copper rule, which actually was the first rule to actually address lead and copper specifically. It had an action level which was set at a 90th percentile of 15 parts per billion. How the 90th percentile works is each community, based on the population they serve, has to take a given number of samples to be tested for lead and copper. And they get ranked from the highest to the lowest. And then you take the total number of samples and you see what 90th percentile is, and then you go across and you go, where is that when you read it off the table from high to low, and then it determines whether you're over or under the limit. In 2011, Congress passes the Reduction of Lead in Drinking Water Act, which is of a revised definition that went from 8% to 0.25% as a weighted average across the wetted surfaces. That means not the exterior, so to where the water is in contact with the plumbing materials. This actually became effective in January 4th, 2014. Why it took 3 years, I don't have an answer for that. July 21st, just last year, Governor Murphy signed a bill for lead service line replacements. all lead and galvanized services are to be identified and removed in the next 10 years. Right?
I'm sorry, identified by who though? You guys or the citizen of Milltown?
We're going to explain that to you. There's a whole section on that, but as soon as we get ready. But it's okay, it's a concern, I understand, it makes sense.
So in December 16, 2021, the lead copper rule revisions, LCRR, became effective. And that established a new 10 parts per billion lead trigger and also the lead service identification or replacement, very similar to the rule that was passed by the Governor Murphy back in July.
So we thought we'd have a discussion here relative to this requirement that the governor has and who is really responsible to go through and replace these services. Right now, it's not clear to us as to what the statute really says. We're not here to tell you that each one of you residents have to do it yourself. We're not here to tell you the state's going to do it. We're not here to tell you the borough's going to do it. But we will tell you that there are financing programs that the state has been talking about. There's, as you all know, you've heard it ad nauseum, probably the infrastructure bill and the amount of money that's coming out through the infrastructure bill, and that there may be a way that that can be financed by the borough. So we are actively working on it at the request of Mayor and Council. We don't have an answer for you tonight, but right now we're not here to tell you that you have to replace it. We have for discussion, and Bill, I think we should do it now, we have a pamphlet that we're going to be sending out to each one of the residents of Milltown to help you identify which type of service you have. And we're going to show you that right now. That pamphlet will be sent to you in the mail, and it's going to give you an idea as to how to determine what type of service you have in the event that you don't really know. It's not 100% effective because we're not suggesting you have to dig up the service in front of your house, but it basically is going to give you information as it comes into the house, which is a pretty decent way of trying to determine it. Once we get past that and we get the information back, then we'll see what additional other work is going to be necessary to do that.
So, it's interesting, it's, PowerPoint doesn't want to actually,
Go through PowerPoint, hit stop. Yeah, stop. All the way to the right.
let's just close it, I can always restart.
Oh,
Okay.
So cheap.
There you go.
We thought this would be a good place to talk about it, so go ahead, we'll go through it.
I can zoom this in if it's hard to read, but basically,
Yeah.
it goes into what we just talked about, the July signing by the Governor Murphy of this bill to replace lead service lines. And then, so we go into what is a typical service, and that's just a placeholder for an image showing, let's see, cursor work here, yes. So showing the incoming line, your water meter, and then going into your plumbing. And where this comes into more information is the next slides. So we have a questionnaire we're asking residents to assist. And what you would be looking at, you see this thing that looks like a snake that swallowed an egg? Well, that's a very clear sign that you have a lead service. So what we say is, you know, does your service or the water coming into the meter, does it have anything that looks like this, yes or no? Then of course we go through questions here. Does it look like any of these? This one obviously being copper, this one obviously being plastic. These two here could be either galvanized or lead, but this new rule says that even if it's galvanized, it's being treated just like it was a lead service. To further clarify, there's some more questions here that I can't read from here. Was the material relatively soft if you scratched it, like if you took a key or something like that, or a coin? Does it scratch very easily, yes or no? Is the metal shiny underneath when you do so? Both of these would probably lean towards a lead possibility or a strong possibility that's a lead service. Is the service line, if it resembles the last two, if you have like a magnet or refrigerator magnet or something like that and it sticks to it, then you're probably looking at a galvanized service. And as we stated in the original part, whether it's lead or it's galvanized, it's going to be treated the same way and it's going to have to be replaced. Any questions on any of that?
Yeah, the pipe going to the valve, say in your basement, it's coming up in the ground, say poured concrete. I mean, obviously, that's not a straight run right from the street, right? Because it's got a 90 down, 90 up, whatever. How do you know that the pipe under the concrete and you know, coming from the street isn't lead?
That's unless there's records, and in most cases there aren't with these
Right.
old lines, whether what Newark went through a number of years ago and the city of Trenton went through. Most of the time the records don't provide that kind of information.
Right, unless you buy the house and the seller's house.
What this
right?
is, what the rule that the governor signed is it's sort of a process. And so you're trying to get from an unknown to a known. And the first pass of this would be, okay, we're going to go out, we're going to survey the customers. Another thing that possibly that some labs and operators do is they might do some sequential testing to try to see if there's, you know, all of a sudden if you take a bunch of samples and then you get a lead spike at some point that you can trace back and you go, it looks sort of suspicious. And what you want to do is you want to get the ones that look like they're suspicious. At some point, if they're still unknown, the state has not left out as a possibility requiring that they actually be excavated and found and determined. You know, that hopefully that's the last effort, because that's a big lift.
Right.
So they're trying to get an idea how many the state really has. So that's what this process is. So, you know, they're going to ask us to try and get the folks in town to give an answer to this, and then use that data to decide what they're going to do next.
Will that data be available to the public?
Yeah, well, the initial lead service line inventory was posted on Milltown's borough's website. There's a lot of unknowns on that list. And so what we have to do now is we have to go back, or we, the borough, everyone collectively, and try to get those unknowns all so that they're known.
What do you mean by, so that, as to, unknown as to whether or not there is lead?
The next reporting period is in July, and then borough is going to have to do the next report. So, you know, the hope is to get this inventory out, and they're going to say, well, what have you done to try to identify unknowns? And say, well, we're trying to survey our customers, and then this is what we gathered from that information, and the state's going to say good, and then they're going to be looking at next year, next July, they're going to be, okay, so now what have you done? Where are we at now? And it's going to be a continuous process until everything's identified with confidence, and then everything's replaced ultimately.
And Bill, I'll just jump in. So, so this is, it's going to be a good initial, and that helps. You're asking who's going to identify this, asking if residents can help self-identify, but with any type of survey, not everyone participates. You know, maybe people aren't sure even with the instructions. Also, part of our efforts of replacing water meters in town to have new updated smart meters. Every home will be having an updated meter. Our water utilities department is part of the check when we're doing the meter replacement, is to help look at those lines and say, they have a checklist as well. Does this home that I'm working on have anything that Bill was just going over? Yes or no? And then that gets added to that master list as well to help get it sent to the state. So it's a little twofold. This hopefully gets a lot of resident feedback, but we'll also have some professional feedback in that as well. You know, I'll say that worked. The utility department came to the house I own now, and I got added to the list through the water. When they did my meter, they added me to the list because they identified a spot in the line that's galvanized. So
They added you to 2022's list or 2018's list?
2022, because I just got added to the list that we're about to send back to the state in July that we're building. I'm added to that list now.
So would you guys be willing to post the results from 2018 too?
That, when you say 2018, the list, that was the list we already had that Bill kind of said was
Well,
published.
no, your first meeting 4 years ago in 2018. You guys had a meeting 4 years ago about putting an inhibitor in the water.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
those results,
There was no inventory at that time requirement in the regulations. That was added on with the July 22nd of 2021.
It's not very different.
So that hasn't been generated.
But it's not very different than the one we sent to DEP recently. It's not
Well,
very
I think are you talking about the list of the properties that are among those that can be tested when we do the water looking for
I'm
lead?
talking about the list of properties that was tested that led to
Right,
the
that's
meeting 4
a
years
different
ago.
list.
Yeah, that's a
That's
different
a
list.
different list.
Right,
There's
so
a-
was that made available to the public back 4 years ago? Was that put on the Milltown website?
That's a revolving list that gets done periodically, so I don't know if that's.
The list that we use, the list
Well,
There's
there's
a approved list
let
by
me just throw
DEP.
something out. Milltown's required to take 40 samples, spread out all throughout the town, in all the areas that have probable lead issues, not areas where the houses are new. So the DEP decides what the sample pool is going to be, and then they say, these are the tiers, is what they call them, tier 1, tier 3, whatever. And you have to pick samples throughout your town that are representative of the older systems that may contain lead. That list, if you want to get on it, you can, but that list of homes is not. If you test it, say you're 123 Main Street, and we test your house, you get the results for you. You don't get the other 39 sets of results.
Right, but I thought the results were posted online.
Sorry, that's the result, so there's two conversations.
That's
that are
the
gonna happen.
inventory
Yeah.
of the lead line
That's what the general,
inventory.
that's what he's asking.
Those aren't really results, those are just
He wants to know
locations.
which homes have lead. I think that's his question.
That's a separate.
The answer is that's the list.
But I guess what he's trying to say is it posted anywhere on the borough website?
Yes, it is.
The lead-
Are the results that you guys get regular, not the results, but the knowns and unknowns, are they regularly posted on the Milltown website?
No.
Or just this one was?
So are you
But this
asking
is
the
two different
results,
things.
the results of the
From the
testing? or
the
which-
analytical results from
Yeah,
the 40 homes?
No, because I understand that that's just me, the citizen gets that report.
Right.
But the knowns and unknown report that was posted on the
Oh.
website?
Yes, that's the unknown lead lines, that's the inventory.
That's how.
Yeah,
That's
on the
online.
That's online.
Yeah, and-
I guess I have to see it.
So it's two different things. So what you'll find online right now is a listing of all the water services in town. And it'll either say, is there lead service? Yes, or it's unknown or no. And at this point, it was a very small, that's what was identified. What's been going on at this point is that we have to update that list as we find out. We have to progressively update the list. And the next deadline for that is July. And that's what everyone has kind of been talking about. We're going to send out a survey. We're also trying to, as your meters get swapped out, have, people do that. Maybe we'll do some further water testing and try to identify that way. That list will always be online, and as it gets updated periodically, you'll be able to see the changes in that.
All right, so you guys base your methods on where you think it might be a hot zone for lead pipes, right?
Well,
Yo,
I mean,
did you just assume
as
for
for
a minute
testing,
that-
yes.
Since that law said 1986, that all these, I want to say like 99% of the homes in Milltown were built before 86. No? You don't agree? My
Yeah,
house looks
that
modern,
could
it was
be-
built
that's
in
possible.
54. But I know that, some people come here, they buy homes and knock it down, they build a new one, they fix that issue. But wouldn't it just be a safe bet to assume that this is a very widespread thing because most of these homes are...
Well, anybody can test their home for lead. There's no law that says you can't. The sample pool that's picked by the DEP, the 40 sites, that's what Milltown's required to do. They're not required to do,
No,
2,500
I
sites.
totally understand that, but...
And lead services, and I don't have the date at the top of my tongue, lead services were stopped even before a lot of these regs went into place. People realized the dangers of lead services. You're not going to see homes in 1985 going in with lead services.
Right.
If you do, you got a wacky plumber that did the job.
Right.
But I wish I had the date, but I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. So I'd like to keep things
There's the
factual,
website right
not
here, if you
go
want
off
the
into
website.
a hypothetical. But you're looking at many years ago they recognized it and they stopped putting lead services in.
Okay.
Why don't you continue, Bill, with the presentation, and then we'll go through it, open up for questions. The age of your home would be helpful too, sir, if you have that.
54.
What street you live on?
Ox.
Ox?
Do you happen to know if you have galvanized or lead service coming in? No.
I'm going to say copper.
I'm surprised it comes through the floor there. You got a basement or just slab under it?
Yeah, it's a basement, it's poured concrete, and, yeah, comes right up.
Need your garden place? That put oaks there?
And I know that Garden Place had a lot of issues with their water in the past. I
Yeah.
don't know if you were on the council back then, but...
Well, we made some improvements over there, looped the line so it
Right, right.
wouldn't be a dead end. That was a dead end for a long time. So.
All right, so October 16th, to make things interesting, 2024, EPA anticipates that they're going to have finalized forthcoming lead and copper rule improvements. That'll be called the LCRI. So that's just something to look forward to, that there'll be more things going on in the years to come. So these are not the only representations of markings that you would see for lead-free, but these are a couple of them. You see over here on the top, you have NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation, and there's these things certified to ANSI 61-G, or you have this NSF ANSI S372. International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. You have lead-free, UPC. You might see codes like that. These are some examples. There are a couple others, certifications. We have also, I have some examples here. Here's a ball valve. You can see it on the blue tag. There's an LF written on it, but also on the handle it says lead-free. And you have two little mini valves, and there's LF engraved in the circled areas. That means they're lead-free. Not all the manufacturers label these things in the same way. And the reason why I bring some of this up is this lead that we're seeing when you do sampling and you do testing is either from the lead service or from the plumbing materials in the home. The water coming in the pipes to the home does not have contained lead in it. So some of the things that we have to look at, we saw that, 86, they still said 8% lead was still lead-free. So that was still going on, and that wasn't resolved until 2014. So though the concentration of lead in those materials was way less, it was still present. Just a little excerpt here about lead. You can see some examples of pipes on the corner, the picture. Bullets, if those of you that have been around long enough remember the lead, unleaded gasoline, fishing sinkers, batteries, old plumbing materials including surfaces. Some of the old paints had lead in it, which is a concern with the kids with the paint chips. Older weights that were used for balancing the tires, they used to contain lead. I believe they've changed that with a lot of different alloys now. Lead glass, anybody had those fancy lead glass wine glasses? Actually, if you have a glass of wine, you let it sit there long enough, it's probably acidic enough that it might start pulling some lead out. Within alloys of older fixtures and brass fittings, you're going to see some lead. Copper, it's a little bit about it. It's a good conductor, cookware, electrical wire housing. You know most of this, but just so we know what we're talking about here. So what is a part per million and what's a part per billion? Well, a part per billion is a milligram per liter. What that means is basically 1 part per million parts is a part per million. To put it in simpler terms, and a ppb would be 1 part per billion parts. If you multiply ppms by 1,000, you convert them to ppb. So if you see something and the numbers are flipping back between ppm and ppb, that's the conversion. So the EPA put out this little brochure about concern about lead in your drinking water. It goes through the, let's see, can I do it this way? I wish I had a red dot.
Pointer for you?
You know what, I don't know if they work sometimes.
No, I'll just point myself if you want me to.
But, you have your main, and you have where it's connected, and then you have the line that comes in from the main, connects to a water meter, and then distributes throughout the house. And you have a copper pipe, possibly with lead solder. You could potentially have a lead service line if it's old enough. Lead goosenecks, sometimes they took the lead copper and they have a little loop-de-loop so that there's some flexibility in order to line it up with the main. I'm told that Milltown did not use lead goosenecks, or we haven't seen any of those.
Not yet, no.
Okay. Galvanized pipe, lead particles can attach to the surface. This is Another one of those reasons why, and I love this light in my eye, is that they want those removed as well. Faucets, some of those fancy fixtures that were pre-2014. There's a professor over at Rutgers who's made a study of old fixtures, and he can actually identify from where that fixture was made, what percentage of lead is in it, and that he's bought stuff over the years from Home Depot and Lowe's and did all kinds of testing. He's got a little niche, and I've seen him talk, but I can't think of his name at the moment. But a fantastic professor. If you go onto New Jersey Drinking Water Watch, there's a listing of what we're looking at for action level exceedances, which is why we're putting the corrosion control. This one here is another slide also from the Drinking Water Watch. And this is the surface water, source water for lead and copper results. And if you can see here that the source water coming into Milltown is all less than the detection limit of the instrumentation. The water coming in is lead-free. This is a plumbing issue between the service line and the plumbing in the homes and the lead solder. The last two readings that AGRA assisted the borough with were 43 samples were taken in the first half of 2021. 26 samples had concentrations lower than the testing capability of the instruments. However, the 90th percentile was at 17.2 ppb, which is over the action level of 15. Therefore, this would trigger public education notices that I think AGRA was spearheaded to get sent out to the customers, notifying them that their community was over the action level.
Every quarter.
And then in 2000, in the next half, samples were taken. 23 had concentrations. Is that right to 43 again was taken in the second half?
So there's sometimes we end up with more samples because we put out more samples because you never know if you're going to get. You need to get at least 40. So we put out probably close to 50 in the hopes that we get everything back in the time frame that we have.
23 had concentrations lower than the testing capability. The 90th percentile for the last round of testing was actually 12.4 ppb, which is less than the action level.
So it's below the action limit. If they were all like this, there wouldn't be.
We wouldn't be having this discussion right now. Actually, well, we'd still be talking about lead services because we still have to identify and remove. So, corrosion control. Regulations require that the corrosion control strategy be implemented if the action level exceeds any 2 sample rounds. And this is a copy of the notice. I don't know if you can see that okay, but the important part is this slide here, which I've highlighted, because this is right from the DEP's notice, because Milltown recently incurred lead action level exceedance during the monitoring period of 7/1/19 and 12/31/19. The original 12-month installation period will recommence. The system is required to install the approved corrosion control within 24 months of this letter. And that letter was sent to Milltown and signed off on December 16th of 2019. Want to go to the public brochure?
Yeah.
So, one of the important things here, hopefully this will be visible enough. I'll try to zoom in here, see if I can do this. That's wrong.
That's good. You guys are gonna get.
So,
Have to see it anyway.
rather than go through this whole brochure, which you should have been submitted at one point, I think AGRA probably resent this at some point in time.
Yeah, this is the Consumer Confidence Report. It's called the CCR.
Actually, no, this is the brochure on the just lead copper. This one is.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's because it got the same header.
Yeah, let's just.
Yeah.
And all that information that's on that has to be in there.
So a lot of this is mandated by the state, what's covered. But I want to go over here, steps you can take, you can see the cursor here, to reduce your exposure to lead in drinking water. You know, obviously you want to try to determine if you have a lead service or if you have interior lead plumbing, solder. You want to replace any plumbing fixtures that are questionable. The simplest thing you can do is run your cold water for a long enough period of time that you're convinced that you're pulling water from the main and not from the piping between your house and the main. That could vary. The state's language is 15 to 30 seconds. Certainly no harm in flushing longer than that. You want to make sure it feels like it's cold when it's, and you feel the temperature dropping to be convinced that it's coming from the main. Use cold water for cooking and preparing baby formula. You don't want to use the hot water. Boiling will not remove lead, so that's something you don't want to do. You're not going to achieve removal of lead by boiling. Use alternative sources or treatment, you know, whether you have a home filter if you're concerned. The aerators and screens, I know the ones I have in my house, they usually don't get cleaned until, you know, there's hardly any water coming out of them. It's probably not the best practice. You probably want to do that periodically. Sometimes particles get trapped in there, and some of those particles may be from plumbing or materials that could have some lead. If you flush it out, and, you know, take those screens off and clean them, it's a good safety procedure. Of course, you can have your water tested. You can find labs on this website here that are certified. You want to make sure any lab used is certified. There's plenty of places like Home Depot say they'll test your water. They're not gonna. It's not a certified lab, and those results aren't really going to get you good information.
So wait, you mean to tell me that the free water testing kits are given out at Home Depot are just?
Yeah, they're not going to tell you that you got lead in it, what the concentration, and they're not a certified lab. They're basically trying to see what your hardness of your water is, and hey, you need a water softener. That's.
No, you guys are aware that they are giving out free. Oh, okay, so you know.
I know they do that. That's why I mentioned Home Depot, but it's not. You know, they're basically trying to convince you if you have a high hardness or something like that that you should have a water softener. It's not a certified lab. Agra knows because they also are a certified lab.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, what's your company again?
it's called Agra Environmental and Laboratory Services.
Agra Environmental.
But to Bill's point, a lot of treatment companies will also do some analysis, but you have to be careful because they're in the business to sell treatment.
Right.
So they'll say, you failed for everything, now we've got to, and I'm not saying that always happens, but it's something to be aware of. So if you, again, and Bill's correct, if there's a list of certified labs throughout New Jersey that are available, that are certified by the New Jersey DEP, and you can contact them, and they run, you know, they don't sell treatment, they just do analysis.
This particular document Bill's reading over was a public information document that was sent out to the borough. It can be sent out again. It's very informational. We got it from the DP and the EPA, and it gives you some ideas. In the event you're concerned about what kind of service you have, you can at least protect yourself. That's really what I happen to like about it. It gives you a way, even if you suspect it, at least you know you can do certain things, especially with the children in the house and those kind of things.
Right.
I have my wife following it myself, so she doesn't use hot water. And the reason why I use hot water because it particularly dilutes the lead if there's any lead in there. So there's some things in here that are helpful. I think it basically gives you a fighting chance to deal with it. That's all. So
All right, so my next question, you just mentioned the kids, I might as well just get to the point here. The schools, I mean, I couldn't find any information on what year the schools were built. They seem kind of modern. But I mean, there's no like risk of the schools, like water fountains or whatever they're using to cook the water. They might be
The schools have their own regulations that regulate them, and they're supposed to have tested, and Max is probably, well, actually Max has been involved with some work with us in some other cities, and they're supposed to have tested all their fountains and any that or elevated levels, because yes, there's some of the old schools do have fountains that have lead and they do have levels. They're turned off, capped, and signs put on them, and you know you can't use the water, and they were shut down.
When the rule came out originally, it was to test every sink in every school every 6 years in New Jersey, and daycare centers. But now they are moving towards every 3 years. So we're coming into another testing cycle. So all the sinks where water is consumed, they test every sink in the school. Under the Department of Education, that's separate from the Department of Environmental Protection.
And the lead copper rule revisions, and I didn't put this up here because there's a whole bunch of aspects to it. The water utility is going to be required to test a percentage of the schools in their distribution system every over I think it's a 4-year cycle, as I recall, that they've covered all the schools in a 4-year cycle, so that whatever percentage it is that can get you there. But yes, that is a concern, and it's something to be aware of, and I share your concern. I was, in my younger days, I was in the city of Trenton, and I had a house that was, the age of the house was listed as 70 plus years, which means they didn't know when it was built. Let's just say it was probably an old farmhouse that then eventually became a city. I had galvanized pipes and everything else, and the simplest thing you can do if you're concerned is just run that water long enough that you know that you've purged everything that's in the plumbing and you're pulling from the main that's out in the street.
You can tell there's a temperature change. You all know that when you turn your water on in the morning, especially in the cooler months, you can tell the temperature goes from cool to really cool, or vice versa, especially in the summer months also. So
Well, it might be
that's
harder in the summer because your source water is coming in from New Brunswick. And New Brunswick has surface water, so surface water in the summer may warm up and then cool it, so it might be a little harder in the summer, but
Next slide.
you might want to have an electrician look at your electrical if you think that maybe there might be some grounding issues, because grounding and electrical can also affect the corrosion. Now, obviously, you could put in reverse osmosis and softeners. Some of these things may be effective on lead, may. Softeners probably less likely. Reverse osmosis, good chance they would pull out the lead.
But those systems require a lot of maintenance. If you don't maintain these home treatment devices properly, the results that you get from them can be worse than the lead problem. So I'm always hesitant to recommend you consider those.
So any questions on any of that? And that should have gone out previously, and maybe that's something Agri could be looking at as another run of the brochure. So factors that influence corrosion: electrical, chemical, biological, physical. Physical, somebody goes out there and jackhammers the street, and you got your yard, and there's a lead service, so obviously you can see that vibration is going to shake whatever might be inside that pipe off. Electrical stray currents can also affect biological growth in organisms. The way they, that's a very complicated mechanism, how they reproduce and digest and do their thing. And chemical, and we're going to concentrate on the chemical. Things like alkalinity, pH, dissolved inorganic carbon, corrosion inhibitors can affect it. Calcium and magnesium hardness, dissolved oxygen, ammonia, chloride, sulfates, natural organic material, also known as NOM. Any changes, sudden changes in chemistry can affect what's happening with the lead in the pipes and how it goes into the water system. If all of a sudden you're always running at a pH of 7, and all of a sudden there's a sudden change in treatment and now it's coming out at 6, that could cause something to happen. So you can add a corrosion inhibitor to control some of this. And this is a couple pictures in the Borough of Milltown zinc orthophosphate feed room. This equipment's going in. It's not running yet. That control panel I'm told, is going to be powered up tomorrow. So the room has a safety shower, has a couple chemical feed pumps. There'll be some containment. There'll be drums that'll be taking zinc orthophosphate. We worked with Shannon Chemical, who did a little study. And based on some water quality and came up with some recommendations on what kind of dosage concentration should be added. We got permitted through the state. They approved it as an effective corrosion control treatment plan.
So did you guys design that setup?
We did not design the pumps. These are come actually as a skid. This, we work with the contractor to make sure it has all the bells and whistles on it in order to feed the chemical. For instance, as if your pumps shut off at Elkins Lane pumping station, you don't want the chemical to keep feeding. You want it to be smart enough that it says, okay, shut the chemical feed pumps off. If the water flow is increased, it has to be smart enough that it ramps up the feed pumps so that it keeps up with how much
Right,
water is
right.
flowing through. Yeah.
Correct, it's the run flow.
So do you guys know any other towns that have this setup installed?
Yes, one of my slides
Many
has
towns have this.
Do they?
some stuff here.
It's pretty common.
It's
this
been
is
used as
common.
early as the 1930s. 1970s, zinc phosphates began to be introduced, and more water suppliers. And I think we're getting, this is the slide you're looking for. In a report from Caris Chemical, another supplier of these types of chemicals, it's estimated that in 2001, 56% of water utilities were using some form of phosphate. Middlesex Water adds zinc orthophosphate to the water, at least they did the last time I checked with them. East Brunswick receives from Middlesex, and therefore their water has zinc orthophosphate. The borough of Sayreville uses orthophosphates. I'm told it's not a zinc, it's just an orthophosphate. Suez, which is now technically Veolia Water, they just changed their name a couple weeks ago, operates the Jersey City water system, and they add a orthophosphate blend manufactured by Caris. So if that answers some of that, yeah, these are not new and
Just on Jersey
far,
City,
they're, you know,
they have over 50,000 customers and they passed their lead tests.
Right.
and that's an old city, a lot of old infrastructure.
Real quick, what was your company name?
CME Associates?
Agri.
Oh,
Oh, no, him.
yeah,
They'll work for
CME,
CME,
CME
Borough
Associates.
Engineers Office.
They'll
work
They
for
got business cards, I can't make, I'm a little hard of hearing, I can't make.
We got cars.
Yeah, we got some.
Closer. Seriously.
So the benefits of adding phosphates, reduce lead and copper corrosion, clearer water, reduce disinfectant demand. We believe this is going to be a win-win. You know, phosphorus, though it's not phosphates, you know, you can be found in milk, can be found in a can of Pepsi, and phosphoric acid. I believe one of the New Jersey American plants actually feeds phosphoric acid as part of their control. This is an interesting chart. You can see on the right-hand side the corrosion risk. The red squares represent potential for corrosion. Corrosion being the anode is on this side here, on the left side. You can see I've highlighted lead, and on this side I've got copper, bronze, and brass. And you see, you know, where they intersect there is a red section, so it's definitely in the you know, a series of galvanic action that's going to want to corrode and want to, you know, release lead, which is part of the reason why we're here.
Is, no, never mind. That's a question I can figure out myself.
And you know, I don't know how much you want to go into this, but phosphates form a film basically. There's a cationic complex. It prevents the diffusion of oxygen. It's very insoluble compound that it forms with the metals that are in the piping, and you're basically going to, you know, inhibit the corrosion and inhibit the lead from getting into the water.
See the last slide?
We can keep going.
Okay.
So precipitates, I don't know how much of this you want to see. Shock, he's with EPA, isn't he?
I'm sorry.
Shock, he's with EPA, isn't he?
Yeah.
You know, he did some studies of formation in soluble films. PO4 within, you know, ions and linkages. What do we got here? May bond directly with the pipe or soluble ions, reduce corrosion in the distribution system. Zinc, which is the one we're looking at for Milltown. you know, for corrosion control. It doesn't sequester, something, there's a word that you might not see every day. Sequestering is different than corrosion control. Sequestering is when you take something and you keep it in solution. For instance, if you have iron in your water, you see it, and I add a sequestering agent, you won't see that iron precipitate out, but it's still there. We're actually going to do corrosion control so that we don't have the lead. In this particular case, we're talking about going into the water, whether visible or not visible. We just don't want it, you know, when the laboratory grabs a sample and does a testing, you don't want to see readings there. Optimal pH, you know, we're looking at a pH range of 7 to 9, excess of 3 parts per million. It's probably going to leave little change. But we're going to look to Shannon Chemical for some of their insight, because they've been doing this as their specialty.
What, this
Zinc orthophosphate, yeah.
Orthophosphate?
Yeah.
So,
It's passivation, right?
That's correct.
So it's basically, we're coating the inside of the pipes to prevent contact between the water and lead.
And the real advantage there is that, you know, if you have lead solder, and some of these things, this mysterious things like a fixture in your house that has 8% lead, or maybe more if it was pre, you know, 2011, it could, or in 1986, maybe even has a higher level. Get that coating in there so you don't have that coming out. But still, the simple solution is just run the water.
yeah.
All right? And that's about, I think we covered all the highlights there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
So you want the lights back on, James?
Ralph, please.
Can you tell me where to switch it?
We got it covered.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ralph.
James, back to you.
Yeah, no, it was, thanks for a good presentation, and we'll put that on the website, as well. So I know some of the slides are difficult
Yeah,
to see.
channel
so
15
we'll
as well.
add that out, and yeah, and channel 15 as well, this video recording as well as the slides from that as well. But I know we had some good questions throughout, but does anyone have more questions they want to ask now?
The water testing company, do you test for anything other than lead?
Well, yeah, the DEP requires, there's a whole, you know, a list of testing that has to be done, bacteria testing, disinfection byproducts because the water's chlorinated. Also, New Brunswick is testing the water on their end before it gets to you for a lot of different contaminants. I did want to say earlier that if you go onto the New Jersey DEP website, onto the Drinking Water Watch website, and you can Google Milltown, you put their name in, it will come up, and there's a whole drop-down bar that you can click on, and it has all the facilities information, the population classifications, any violations, but it also has all the results from all the tests that are taken. So that's a pretty good resource. That's
So it has all the results of the tests they've taken for Milltown?
yeah.
Not-
Because the
Not
labs-
individual customers, but for the whole system. I mean, every system.
Well, for the system, your name is, the customer's name's not on there, but
Is their address on there?
no.
Is that like some kind of privacy thing that you guys can't do that?
Yeah, the DEP will you can't put that on there.
So you guys could test my neighbor's line and he could be high in lead and I would never know that that's my neighbor's.
Well, if you saw,
Wouldn't
I don't know if you would know.
There's a
Unless you
significant
talked to them and they said, hey,
difference
my lead's high, no,
What's
probably
strange is
not.
there's like a significant difference, and I'd say that the architecture of my house versus all my neighbors. I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, maybe a few of the houses were built maybe even before mine. But I mean, so there's no way you guys would release a map that shows, like, you know, which houses or what addresses.
No, because there is an inventory list of the lead service lines
With addresses.
with addresses.
Could you guys maybe post that to the Milltown website? So, I mean, I feel like the more public knowledge is out there would allow citizens, just regular, ordinary, everyday, look, we know it's not the government's fault, right?
Sure.
I mean, New Jersey was settled like 300 years ago, you know? But anyway, you know, just so that regular citizens could make the most, you know, just give them the data so we can make the best decisions for ourselves. To be honest with you, I wouldn't mind digging up my front yard to see if I got a lead line coming to the house. But like, you know, personal responsibility, like give us the data so we can take the corrective action. You know, I'm not asking Phil Murphy to pass a law that's gonna provide funding for this. If I have the money and I could do it, and I wanna do it now because I want my son to have clean drinking water, and when I boil water, I don't want the, whatever, what's his name said there. But you get my point? Like, the more data you give us, the more informed the decision we can make that'll benefit us, but without.
I see where you're going, because your house has lead, let's say it does, because your neighbor has it, doesn't mean it's, if your house is built back below 1900s, maybe there's a correlation, but there's no real correlation. We found in some towns, there's a house at street, let's say house number 10, and number 12, not a problem. It just depends on what was used for the service. And it's really, there were requirements at the time that allowed certain things to be used. I can tell you, years ago, we did water line replacement on Riva Avenue in Milltown. And we believe that that concrete in the roadway was WPA, which is the 1930s, 1940s. Now, when we opened that road, the best copper tubing I've ever seen. So you just can't call it. And we found in Milltown, you just can't tell. What you have here now is you got galvanized services, you got lead services, you got the combination thereof, and it's hard to tell. I mean, I would look at what, we're gonna send you this pamphlet out, and you can take a look at what your pipe coming out of the floor looks like. That'd be the first start. And if you find that when you scratch that pipe, it looks like lead, then the next stop would be possibly to look at digging up the service in front of your house.
Right.
But
Would you guys commit to putting that list of addresses on Milltown website?
Well,
Can I just say, the list is, so the list is the inventory list that we are at this point compiling and updating as we can. That will be on the that's on the website right now, and I think there's, 11 properties that were identified when the initial list was required to be submitted to the state. Since that time, we've been working to identify more and more, and we'll update the list, and that will be on the website. So you will always have that information. It's got the address, it's got everything that you'd want to know to identify where those lead services are. The other piece is the houses that we test that are on the DEP's list. Is that list available? Is that no, that's not something we can share. Because that would be the only two pieces that we would have at this point. One we can share, and the other one we can't share.
you'll get the information out. If your neighbor has a lead service, it'll be on that list. But it doesn't mean you have one. I think that's what I'm trying to get across. I understand what you're trying to do. Your thought is, well, if he has one, I might have one too, so, but.
And you know what, and that's not bad thinking, because, if your neighbor has it, and
You might.
then all the neighbors should sit there, gee, we better take a closer look at ours, and maybe they're, no, mine doesn't look anything like that, well, that's good, and maybe you go, gee, it does look similar, and then, get together with the borough, anything that the citizens can do to help make this process go smoother is definitely appreciated, and can be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the list that Bill developed and, that CME developed to go out that identifies that this might be lead or maybe it's galvanized. I mean, that's where citizens of the town can help, because if 150 or 500 people, they do the scratch test and they go, hey, we have lead, or we think we have lead. Well, now the town has a better understanding of where that stuff is. And if it's confirmed, because you can do a little swab test and you can tell if it's lead, then you can put it on the website. Then there's power and information, but the town doesn't know magically where the lead is, because we can't look at the ground and tell you where it is. But people who own the homes can do more detective work than we can.
Here's the reason for the pamphlet.
Yeah, and also the pamphlet, there's still a lot of concern about COVID. We just came out of a rough era in all of our lives. And, I'm sure there's still a lot of residents, the last thing they want is people from the borough or from some consultant walking around their basement, when they're trying to stay, clear and safe and keep themselves, out of harm's way. So this is something that the residents can do, get information to the borough without, being impinged upon by somebody, a stranger walking into their house.
There's a question back there.
A question, lead is an important issue, but the water in Milltown has a lot of other issues. It's commonly, for years, been discolored. It discolors your fixtures, your toilets, your sinks, your clothes. It smells like you can walk down the pond here and smell that water, and it's the same stuff that's coming out of our pipes. So the question is to the testing company, what's causing this and what's in that?
Well, there's a lot of water movement through the pipes, and sometimes the tank levels drop, there's work being done somewhere. Was main replacements going on actually this week. And sometimes when the level drops and then it gets repumped and refilled, that, the water's flowing a certain way throughout the whole town. And when that direction changes through some flushing action or a repair, that can really upset the apple cart. So there's sediment that's in that pipe, iron sediment, all kinds of stuff. And it can get kicked up and it starts to float around. So I'm thinking that's what it is. I mean,
This doesn't happen only when the hydrants are flushed. This happens on a regular basis, and it's happened for years.
well, we'd be happy to come out and test your water. You wanted to contact the,
That's not it. I've changed my water tank. I flush my water tank on a monthly basis. It has nothing to do with that.
So let me take a
It's
run.
not only my house, it's houses on the block, it's houses throughout town. People have taken pictures of their tubs filled with water that looks like the pond down here.
Sir, we didn't get your name. Can I have your name, please?
Visicate,
Your first name?
Bill.
Bill. So, as you may know, for the last several years, the borough has been attempting to put in place a water main lining and or replacement project, because we have old cast iron lines, and you've probably heard this story ad nauseum, but the old cast iron, basically, as it corrodes, the basic tubercles grow into the water flow. And those sometimes cause the discolored water that you're talking about. But in fact, I've just been authorized over the last week by the borough to make a list of what it would cost to replace and or line every one of the old cast iron pipes in the borough. And with that, the borough has received in the last, and I'll let Jeanette talk about that, but in about the last 2 years, you've got grants in the amount of $3 million, and there's projects going on right now. So that there's that, and that's going to continue. In addition, this corrosion control will help that. I hate to say it's going to make that go away, but the corrosion control will help. It does go through and line your pipes in addition to the services and your fixtures in your house. We believe it should provide some benefit. But if this project continues where we continue to replace lines, and we're out on Chestnut, we're going to Highland next, and then there's another, hopefully, $2 or $3 million coming every year, you'll start to get ahead of it. We have been trying, but because of the huge cost to replace it. Doesn't mean your water's bad, it just means that you've got iron particles in it. And as far as the odor that you get sometimes, you'll find it usually is only when you have hot water. It doesn't usually happen when it's cold water, and the reason is because, well, okay, well, I don't know, I don't have the water in Milltown, but I have the same problem in my house. When I turn the hot on, I get that musty smell. And it's basically because it's surface water. You might have grown up with groundwater when you grew up, and when you have groundwater, a whole different source of water, and it does have a different odor to it. But it doesn't mean the water's bad, and believe me, Agra's checking it, and on a regular basis, New Brunswick's checking it. It just is because it's surface water, it sometimes has that different odor to it. And the hot water does bring it out. Not always, but it does generally. And I think that you'll see an improvement slowly, but it's happening.
And one of the possibilities also is, and I'm going to go back to my history in Trenton, is that old farmhouse that I had. I would turn on the water for the bathtub and for the sinks, and it would come out brown and rusty, but after it ran for 5 minutes, it would go away. When I had a plumber finally come in and redo the bathroom, all the pipes coming through the walls and in the bathroom were all galvanized. So I mean, that's a possibility too. You have to look at all things that could possibly lead to it. Could just be the mains and all mains, but sometimes the plumbing materials as well. Sometimes.
But I understand your concern. Help is on its way. I wish it was faster, but you're talking about an awful lot of money, and I think that the grants have been trying to go through and keep the costs under control.
I'm sorry, if I could ask, what street do you live on?
West Joshua.
Okay.
You can't drink the water.
Coincidentally, I think we're headed.
Why do you up there would drink that water when it's colored the way it is?
I think we're headed to your neighbor next. I think, correct? Neighborhood. Yeah.
discolors your clothes.
I mean, every test that we take, we have to submit it to the DEP, you know, and if there's a failure, you get a letter right away. I mean, you can see the result with lead. They don't sleep down there. I mean, they're up all night looking for ways to find problems with the water system. So, every test we take has to get submitted. So, the bacteria test, everything's been good. I would say that, you know, if you have consistent problems, reach out to the water department and maybe we could, you know, it'd be worth to do an iron and manganese down there and maybe a bacteria test, just to make sure everything's okay.
But we have, and that's what Mike McClellan was alluding to. We have been trying to identify every area in town, growing up in town. I know areas that have been struggling longer than other areas, and trying to slowly but surely find every problem area to get rid of dead-end loops, reline certain cast iron piping to try to alleviate those areas. That's what Mr. McClellan was alluding to, Highland and Chestnut. That's exactly what they're doing right over there, right? We're trying to kill a dead end on Van Loo and reline that area to alleviate some of that area, but trying to get every area of town eventually. But it's expensive and it takes a lot of time. But we're trying to composite a list, and I'm making a list myself, trying to make sure we always have a backlog of inventory of where areas we have to go, and that's what Mr. McClellan was going to, how many areas, what's a master list and a master cost of doing it, and trying to chip away at that for the next few years.
What's your name again?
I'm Councilman Peretti, James Peretti.
Do you have a card?
I have a card, yeah. And I would say if you're trying to get in contact with any of the professionals too, I'm happy to go through me as the councilman. I'm happy to put you in touch with them if they want to give you your card as well. But you'll always shoot me an email, or my office extension is on my phone on the card. Give me a call.
Very good.
Any other questions?
I just have one question. So I think somebody was saying that you don't test newer homes? Is that, was that, or do you test newer homes? Are there concerns?
Generally, for
For
lead.
the lead? Yeah.
Because there's no requirement. I mean, again, the DEP says, okay, they have a criteria for sample pools. It's based on tiers. And some are multifamily, single-family, houses built before '84, houses with known lead. There's a whole criteria list that we have to go through. We create a list, a map of the entire town. These are the old areas. Okay, we have to satisfy a representative sample of every corner of the town. Okay, we get 40, 50 places. We have a list of probably 60 or 70 go-to places that we can go to. But we need to take 40 samples every 6 months for lead and copper. Okay? Then we sent that list down to the DEP. They look at the maps, they look at the tiers and the designations, they say yes or no, you need 10 more spots, get rid of these. So at the end of the day, those are the spots we have to use. That's an improved sample plan that we can't deviate from. I mean, but if somebody doesn't want to participate in the testing, obviously then we say, okay, you know, 50 North Main doesn't want to do it, let's go to 51 or something. We're allowed to do that, but we have to change the list, send it to the DEP, get it approved, get it back.
I was just wondering because, you know, service lines that might have been put in, you know, prior to, you know, or after
Sure.
a certain date, is there concern for that? Or, you know, were there codes or regulations, you know, I'll throw out my house 2013. So,
Your house was built in 2013?
yes, so at
Like-
that time, was there a
Lead was
code-
not permitted in 2013.
So my service line to the house
Should not
would
be
be
lead.
fine.
I mean, unless your plumber did something that was not.
Well, that's what I'm asking. Does that have to be
Your service
inspected?
line
Yes,
was
it
put in
does.
2013? Your service line?
Well, that's what I'm
House.
asking.
Okay.
There was a house originally on the property.
Okay.
So could they have used the old service line? Or is that something
I
that,
would say that's possible.
That's
I wouldn't
There's
say.
two houses on the property.
yeah,
They put two houses on the
But
property.
I don't
so
know-
they had to run new service lines. I saw them do it.
Okay.
you
There
did.
you
That's
go.
your answer.
Okay, so mine wouldn't
There you
be
go.
an old one or something like that? Because that's what I'm wondering, would that be on the plans or anything like that? Could I go to the township and ask?
Well, the plans might show the new service being installed, you know, but then again, you get a plumbing inspection
But-
and plumbing permit.
Yeah, if you want to contact the construction office for permitting, you can, that's we can trace that down. That's, the construction office can find the permits. that-
Yeah, I mean, I could look at my service line just to see, but I'm just curious if, you know, that would also.
But yeah, the
show on
construction
plan.
office, Vinnie Lupo would help with that.
Yeah.
But when you send that flyer out, you check your service inside the house, that's the first thing, and you go from there.
Okay. And then the other question was, okay, so the lead levels from New Brunswick are acceptable. So a lot of the concern is, you know, from the, you know, your service line going into the house and
Not
the
just
piping into the
acceptable,
house.
below the detection limit of the
It's the only concern. Well,
Yeah.
as a citizen.
So there's no concern between New Brunswick to your service line? That's,
It's a plumbing issue.
So
That's
the
all
main
acceptable.
variance is from the service line to your house.
From the main to your house.
Yeah, the main.
from the main to your house? Okay.
Can I say something? No, okay. You know, so I'm not putting myself on the camera, so I'm standing behind it. Sorry, I'll keep you on the. I moved here in 1988 into a house that was built on Clay Street, a house that was built in 1908 with the first Michelin people here. Okay, you know where I live, James. Okay. My wife and I at the time, her grandfather was a plumber. Looked at it. My back door neighbor was Ray Jolly. Told me the same thing. And I asked him, you know, I saw some of the water things that Bill was talking about. And so this is back over 30 years ago. We did. We got our grandfather and his friends, and they went out to the street. They dug it up, put a whole new line for us, you know, at least the part they could, you know, they can get to. I don't know if the part that's under Clay Sheet, underneath that concrete was changed, but the other stuff, we changed. Because it's exactly what we saw, and he taught me back then. It was the stuff, you know, the kind of galvanized pipes with the big lead fittings and all those kind of things you're talking about, Bill. That's what we had. But the house was built in 1908. There were houses down the same street that did not have that, including my next door, like across the street when they did it, when they had to dig, as Milltown requires you to dig down and, you know, into the street and pay for it yourself, which is the law, fine. They did not have lead service coming to the house. They had all copper. And it was like one house, McGowan.
Yep.
That, right there. So it, as you can tell, I can tell you from personal experience, that's the way things are at Milltown. You need to be vigilant. And I can tell you, as somebody that talks to a lot of people, not because I'm not political, it's nothing like that, you guys know me. I'm telling you, a lot of people come to me because I run the TV station, I got a big mouth, I hear blah, blah. But guess what? You know what I tell them? I am not the least bit alarmed that there's a problem in Milltown on a town level. There's definitely a potential problem in old houses. You need to check it. That is a responsibility. If you're a homeowner, it's just like you got to check a radon years ago, or you got to check the machine to have aluminum wiring, or the same thing. You got to take, this gentleman here said it before, personal responsibility. You have to do that. And I'm telling you as a citizen, not just a cameraman tonight, we have to all take the bull by the horns and look ourselves. That's it.
Back to you, James.
I mean, if no one has any questions, again, we'll still be here. I'll give cards and stuff, I know, but I think Bill wants to.
I have one comment. You know, we don't have a really big audience, but we do appreciate the four of you that came out and your comments. It's good input for the borough, and we appreciate that you came and you expressed your interest.
I think we're well set. But yeah, if there's any questions come up with later, again, happy to contact me, or contact professionals. And as I said, this presentation, as well as this whole meeting, will be on Channel 15 and the Borough website. So
It'll be on YouTube as of probably by tomorrow.
and YouTube as well. So if any of your residents or friends want to find out more about it, you don't have to repeat it. You can kick them over to the resources, and it will be published for them too. So, all right, with that,
Thanks very much.
yeah, without further ado, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.